This is a 75-year-old love story. It's a story of young musicians looking for a place to play music that can only be made by an orchestra. It's a story of audience members who have come to concerts and operas since they were children, now bringing their grandchildren with them. It's a story of dedicated volunteers who have spent countless hours raising money, selling tickets, stuffing envelopes, cajoling friends and business associates to join them. It's a story of daring escapes from repressive regimes to find new musical opportunities in a small southern town. A story of visiting stars and homegrown talent. It's a story with lots of twists and turns, but what all the people in this story have in common with each other is love. An overwhelming love for music, which returns that love at every performance.
This love story begins on November 5th, 1933 at a junior high school auditorium. But it really starts even earlier in the hearts of the young musicians who came together that fall to begin an orchestra. They came for love, a love of music which could only be fulfilled on the stage with each other, performing the music they had grown to love in their school orchestra and for which the city gave them no other outlet. They were really just kids. More than half of them were either still in Chattanooga High School or had just graduated. They found a few adult musicians in town willing to help them get started and to play, including Iris Summers and Earl Van Arsdale from the local Tivoli Theater Orchestra. Melvin Margolin, an underclassman at the University of Chattanooga, was the organizer and conductor of that first concert. It was an ambitious program, including music by Beethoven and Schubert, 2 arias by a local baritone, and even a fiddle tune, Cripple Creek. A review of the concert in the local paper noted that the audience filled the Dickinson Junior High School auditorium and established itself in the hearts of Chattanooga music lovers with its artistic interpretations of the varied numbers included on the interesting program. The Chattanooga Symphony Orchestra was a reality.
The young orchestra continued to perform and draw an audience impressed by its sound and, frankly, the plucky attitude of its young musicians. University of Chattanooga President Alexander Gary invited the players to perform in Patton Chapel and then took the remarkable step to contact the Juilliard Foundation to help secure a professional conductor. The result was the arrival in 1938 of Arthur Pletner, a bookish young man with outstanding musical credentials, but who had also cut his teeth conducting for the Ziegfeld Follies and working with the likes of George Gershwin. Dr. Pletner and his wife, Isa McElray, quickly became musical fixtures in Chattanooga. Juilliard's arrangement with the University of Chattanooga was to cover a portion of Dr. Pletner's salary for a period of 3 years, but those 3 years turned into a lifetime as the Pletners lived and taught in Chattanooga until their deaths in the 1990s. One of the first things Arthur Pletner did in Chattanooga was to launch an association which could further the work of the young orchestra. The new board included well-known Chattanooga names like Chapin, Gary, Cruzy, Finley, and Carter. Mrs. George Patton chaired the first fund drive for the growing symphony.
The years of World War II took their toll on the symphony. The program for the opening concert for the 1942-43 season listed 18 men already away in the service. Another 8 performed that evening in uniform, including the entire trumpet section. But just as the war took some musicians away from Chattanooga, it also brought 2 remarkable musicians to our town. Opera in Chattanooga owes its beginnings to the arrival of 2 prominent European musicians who had escaped the Nazis in 1938. Werner Wolf and his wife Emmy Land Wolf had been stars of the opera houses of Germany, where Dr. Wolf served as conductor of the Hamburg State Opera for 17 years. He had also conducted in the great opera houses of Berlin and Munich and in Italy, Spain, Holland, and Czechoslovakia. Mrs. Wolf had had a successful career as a Wagnerian soprano, but Dr. Wolf was an outspoken man, opposed to Nazi policies, including their efforts to control German music for their own propaganda. He was also Jewish, and he was a natural target for the Nazis. So Dr. Wolf escaped to Holland while Mrs. Wolf and their daughter made their way to Switzerland. Eventually, they all reached New York. Dr. Wolf's friend, the famous conductor Walter Damrosch, advised the Wolfs not to stay in New York where there was an oversupply of refugee musicians, but to go to some small place where there would be greater opportunity. They first joined the faculty of Tennessee Wesleyan College in Athens, but word of their abilities soon reached Chattanooga, and within a year, Mrs. Wolf was commuting to Chattanooga to give voice lessons. Soon thereafter, the Wolfs made their home in Chattanooga.
Joining forces with Dorothy Hackett Ward from the University Theater Department, the Wolfs and Miss Ward jointly staged the first opera production of the newly formed Chattanooga Opera Company in February 1943. The opera was Il Trovatore, presented at the tiny University Theater. All the parts were sung by university students and local amateurs with piano accompaniment. By August of 1943, the young opera company had garnered the interest of many Chattanooga business leaders. Names like Ox, McClellan, Cruzy, and Chapin helped establish the Chattanooga Opera Association. Many of these community leaders had been instrumental only a few years before in helping establish the Chattanooga Symphony as a bona fide musical institution as well. Soon the local papers were full of articles about fund drives, social gatherings to raise money for the two groups, and the occasional comment about the attire of those attending concerts. One columnist lamented the lack of fashionable women's hats at a symphony concert. Editorials, columns, and news stories regularly hailed both the symphony and the opera as important to Chattanooga's prestige and desirability as a place to live and do business.
The 50s and 60s brought changes in artistic leadership to both groups. The symphony was led by a succession of able musicians who each brought a period of artistic growth to the organization. It became truly professional, with most of the players members of the American Federation of Musicians. An impressive array of guest artists joined the symphony, including Artur Rubinstein and Isaac Stern, Patrice Munzel and Robert Merrill, Mitch Miller and Sherry Lewis. The Wolfs, with their great connections to the best singers in the world, brought a number of stars to Chattanooga for opera productions. The best known of these guest artists wasn't even featured at the time of her performance here in the mid-50s, but she went on to a huge career. Beverly Sills never forgot the communities which helped her as she was starting out as a young singer, including her time on the stage at Chattanooga City High School. National and international stars such as John Vickers, Astrid Varney, Norman Treagle, Phyllis Curtin, and Cornell McNeil all appeared in Chattanooga in the 50s and 60s.
In 1967, a dynamic young man arrived in Chattanooga to take over as the conductor of the Chattanooga Symphony. Richard Cormier was determined to take the orchestra to a new level. He doubled its budget in 5 years and was quoted in Variety about Chattanooga's financial success at a time when other orchestras were struggling. He led the symphony in hundreds of concerts for children and in regional performances in colleges and community centers all around Chattanooga. He developed the highly successful Pops in the Park concert series and put a huge emphasis on school performances by the orchestra. After 15 years at the helm, he stepped down in 1983 at the end of the symphony's 50th anniversary season.
During the same period, the Chattanooga Opera had gone through leadership changes as well. By 1983, the opera and the symphony were beginning to believe that perhaps their futures could best be assured by joining forces. It was a novel idea. Indeed, the committee formed to study such a merger could find no other example in the country of a joint symphony and opera company. The marriage of symphony and opera was celebrated in grand style as the two groups came together as one in 1985. Symphony President Whitney Durand and Opera President Claire Binder even cut a wedding cake at the reception. It was the beginning of an experiment which is still working.
Such a new musical undertaking called for a dashing new kind of leadership, and the city got it in the person of Vakhtang Jordania. Only 2 years before, Vakhtang had made his own daring escape from political oppression. Despite a burgeoning career in the Soviet Union, he was stifled at every turn, prevented from accepting engagements in the West, denied the chance to receive awards he'd been given, unable to program the music he wanted to conduct. As luck would have it, Vakhtang had his shot at freedom while on tour as an accompanist for a close friend who was a violinist. They had both talked of defecting to the West whenever the opportunity presented itself, and on a Saturday in Finland, they finally got their chance. Ditching a chaperone who was supposed to give them an afternoon sightseeing tour, the two went back to their hotel, grabbed some small shopping bags with nothing but a few scores, recordings, and batons, caught a cab, and headed to Sweden, leaving behind the Stradivarius violin in the hotel. Vakhtang spent several anxious hours waiting for the U.S. Embassy to open so that he could head to the States. Less than 2 years later, he was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, auditioning for the job of music director and conductor of the new Chattanooga Symphony and Opera Association. On the program that night was Aaron Copland's stirring Lincoln Portrait, a very fitting tribute to freedom and courage.
Vakhtang led the new organization for 7 years before moving on to other opportunities. He was replaced by the best musical ambassador Chattanooga has ever had. Maestro Robert Bernhardt burst on the scene with tremendous energy and infectious enthusiasm for all things musical, and all things baseball, and all things Beatles. It seemed there was nothing that did not capture his attention, and nothing he could not use to convince anyone he might encounter of the joy he found in classical music. Under Maestro Bernhardt's leadership, audiences for Chattanooga Symphony and Opera performances have mushroomed. Classical concerts are all performed twice now, a first in the symphony's long history. Opera productions are the most opulent ever put on a Chattanooga stage. Young people come to concerts by the busload to hear everything from Beethoven to big band. Symphony ensembles visit up to 60 schools every year. 25,000 people gather each summer for Pops on the River. The CSO has never been busier, nor more excited about what's ahead. After 75 years of symphony, 65 years of opera, and 15 years under Bob Bernhardt's leadership, what's bringing all these people to all these performances? Love. The same love that drew audiences on that November afternoon in 1933, or to that tiny opera stage in 1943. The same love that still sends musicians to the rehearsal hall or practice room for hours on end. The same love that draws hundreds of volunteers together every year for galas, auctions, raffles, races, and every other kind of fundraiser to make sure the CSO has the money it needs.
It is the power of the music and the love we all have for it which draws us all together. And it is the music we celebrate and honor in this very special anniversary year. Each of us who love the music and love our symphony and opera share a great bond which stretches across all these years. It ties us to those pioneering young musicians who wanted a place to play together, to the musicians who grace our stage now, to the musical leaders who have shared with us the music they love. It ties us to audience members and patrons who make the music possible. When all is said and done, it's all about the music.